Welcome to Cannabis School. I'm your host, Jesse Angeles.
And I'm Brandon Elder.
And we're here to talk to you about everything pertaining to cannabis, from vape,
flower,
edibles,
strains,
and everything in between.
Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to meet with Anna Symonds. She's a retired rugby Premier League player. She's also a cannabis advocate for sports. Go ahead and check this out.
You're not your regular cannabis activist. You played rugby. How long did you how long have you been playing?
Well, I retired last year and I played for a little over 20 years total. I started in college and continued probably far too long for my body's pleasure, but I was still competing at the top level, and it's really hard to give up the thing you love. So
Right.
So I retired at the age of, I think I was had I turned 41? I was 40 or 41 when I retired. I'm 41 now, but I couldn't remember when my birthday was. But
I totally can relate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you retired, was that due to pain or just damage to your body?
Just oldness. It's a very physical sport, and the recovery, it was just I was still competing well, but I could see the writing on the wall where, it takes more and more out of you to achieve that same level of performance. So the amount of recovery and the amount that you're spending all of your life energy focused on this one thing. And even then, with that, you're still going to see performance inevitably declining. And so, yeah, for me, I was still competing, but COVID disrupted things, and I chose to move to Hawaii. So living out on the islands, I can't really play in the Premier League like I was. It's a pretty far commute. It's not
just a little bit.
So it was a life change, and I almost had to make myself move away to be able to let go of it.
Wow. Yeah, I was about to ask that, because when you're attached to something, I mean, it's not just something you did. It was you. It was part of you. It was your life, and it's like cutting off a limb at that point.
For sure. It's you're a lot of times not just your identity in terms of like your achievements and what you're proud of, but also your social life, your community, and then there's a lot of sense of duty and obligation for the organization. Women's sports, we don't have a lot of funding, and so there's always players among us who are involved in the leadership and helping keep the organization running too. So it was really that big pause of COVID shutting everything down for a while, where I said, oh, now that I don't have, I'm freed from some of these responsibilities. I don't know when play is coming back. And realistically, looking at my age, what else do I want in my life? So
how early in your life did you start using cannabis?
I think I was around 13 the first time I tried cannabis. So yeah, kind of early teen years.
Were you in the States then, or were you in a different country?
Yeah, I grew up in New England.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah.
So pretty young, yeah.
The other stuff where it was good or it was bad, right? It was just like, well, this is good weed, or this is bad weed. You don't want that stuff. That stuff's awful.
It's interesting because I grew up, like along the Vermont border on the New Hampshire side, and Vermont was always known for dank weed, and I was growing up anyway, and so I think even though we were kids and we were sort of still like scraping around, to get a hold of pot, it was like when we did, it was still, I think, decent quality, of course. And all I have to really compare that with is when I went out west for college. I ended up going to school in Southwest Colorado, which I loved, but that was I feel like my first encounters with like brickweed and the very different qualities of that. And of course, Colorado was always known, even prior to legalization, for having dank weed as well. But there's just, being closer over to Mexico and some of those trade routes. I think there's probably more brickweed over that way that made it, at least during that time. I feel like anymore, I don't know if brickweed's even a thing anymore, which is for the best, I guess.
I saw a thing on Reddit and it literally looked like someone had got brickweed that was just broken apart in a bag. And they were like, did my dealer just give me herbs? And I'm like, oh, why are you ever buying that? Like, I don't know where you are
There's
at,
no reason
and I'm
to,
sorry, but you should never be buying that. That was horrible. Just quality has changed.
Yeah. And I feel like, and, I think some of the trade routes have changed too.
Yes.
And so it's not like, a lot more product. I would say most herb is sourced from within the US now, probably, even if people are buying on the unregulated market.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know anybody to be buying Mexican swag right now. That stuff is awful. It's just like, why? So there's a dispensary right over here.
Yeah, for real. So they're all over now.
You used cannabis since 13. Was it on and off? Did you use that throughout college? I mean, of course, coming out to Colorado.
It's a good question. I have tended to go in like ebbs and flows. And some of that's depended on the circumstances of my life, and some of it's been maybe listening to my body, especially as I got older. I started to pay attention to that. So, when I was young, I had kind of my period of rebellion. I was always an athlete. I played all the sports. I was a soccer player up until my first year of college. I found rugby and I switched over. Being an athlete, and especially the era that I grew up in, a kid in the 80s, a teen in the 90s, it was very much like the war on drugs, like the egg, this is your brain, whoosh, in the frying pan, this is your brain on drugs, right? So all that, it was the DARE program, we had all of that. And it was very much like, this will ruin your life. This will damage you irreparably. But, being a rebellious teen, as teenagers tend to be, of course, I tried some things. And so I tried pot, and I was like, oh, this doesn't seem like it's damaging my brain. It seems like pretty mild. Like,
that's mellow.
I did get high, but it wasn't like, it
Not
wasn't scary.
Expect.
It wasn't incapacitating, and it didn't seem damaging. And now, of course, I had never drank alcohol at that point. I didn't try that until maybe a couple of years later. And when I did, it was like, kids binge drinking Natty Ice or whatever we could afford, like whatever people stole. I think the first time that I drank, sorry, Mom and Dad, but it was New Year's and they had gone somewhere, and my friend and I, she came over. It was just us, me and my friend Sarah, and we stole some peach schnapps from my parents' liquor cabinet. And we didn't know about drinking, and we had like a couple warm beers that she had like slowly hidden away from her mom. And so like we had a few warm beers that we were hiding in the closet, and peach schnapps, and we drank all that. And of course we didn't feel good. We got all hyper, and then she threw up, and I was trying to clean it up, and my parents came home, and I was like, so I was like comparing that with like giggling and eating some food and going to sleep. It was just kind of like, and then of course, going further into high school, I was really into sports. And so it was like, the messaging was very much at that point, it became like social too. It was like, oh, you can be an athlete or you can be a druggie, but not both.
Yeah.
And so they sort of make you choose this affiliation, even though it was weird because there were kids who were druggies, but they were really good at sports. It was almost like that movie. What is that movie where it's like, it was from the 90s, but it's the 70s, and there's like the kids on the football team. I don't know.
Confused.
Anyway, yeah, that's the one. That's right.
Yep. Love that movie.
It was sort of like that. There's that, but I think it was like an illustration of like, there are kids who are known as stoners and they're great athletes. And it was presented as like, that was just sort of ignored, or like they were sort of looked at as like, ooh, they're rule breakers, or they're, you're expected to be this athlete who does all the, like, checks all these boxes. And so I think in high school, I probably didn't smoke pot very much. Like I had my 8th grade year, like sort of my rebellious period. And then it was sort of maybe periodic, but not I wasn't seeking it out so much. But the drinking came into play. And I wasn't like drinking a lot, but it was a part, you go to parties and everybody's binge drinking and getting wasted, throwing up, poisoning themselves. And it was like, somehow that's okay. But
yeah, right. How many people do you see like getting
right.
into fights or drunk driving or just like hospital getting alcohol poisoning? You're like, the worst thing I've seen is someone get really anxious and then fall asleep. Or like,
And so then college, it was the same. Like freshman year, I was hanging out with some of the hippie kids, and they always had great pot, and so I was smoking pot more, and it was a different social scene, and then so I went to my first year of college in upstate New York, and then I transferred schools and went out to Southern Colorado. Yeah, I think it was just this occasional. Then it wasn't as judgmental, but it was sort of like something that I didn't necessarily seek out, because also rugby has this big drinking culture. And so after the game, you have a social, and it's even called a drink up, like where you drink with the other team and like sing songs and, eat food and party. And so it's kind of nice in terms of the social aspect, but there really is like a heavy drinking culture attached to the sport. And that after college, when I continued on playing at the adult level, it continued to be that way. The drinking culture was even more pronounced, and I was very much a part of it. And I enjoyed myself. I had fun, but it was really taking a toll on my body. And the older I got, the more I noticed that. And, being in Oregon at that point, we also have a strong cannabis culture in the state. And I had a number of teammates who were kind of like known as the stoners. And I was like, maybe loosely affiliated. I definitely wasn't one of the stoners, but I would hang with them and I would smoke with them. That's how, like, my good friend, it was great. I'd be like, she would give me weed or sell it to me for a friend price in like joint increments. I'd be like, can you roll me like X number of joints? Because she knew I was so like, hopeless at rolling and whatever.
That's
and so
fantastic.
But but then as time went on, I really started, and I really like pushed myself athletically, and I started, trying to sort of like maximize my achievements in rugby, as well as like I started doing MMA as a side sport hobby. I really loved it. And so I was training a ton, and my whole life was focused around that for a few years of just physically, training, doing both of those things for a couple of years. And so, and that's a weight sport too. And so I really I noticed I cut back on drinking because of that, like calories and all those things, and the impacts that it had. But that made me really notice the impacts that it had. And I found myself not liking it anymore. And my body sort of starting to reject it. And at the same time, I was like using my friend's homemade cannabis edibles for getting good sleep, because, when you're training super hard, you need to get to sleep at a certain time so you can get up and train again, and if if you can't fall asleep, it's a big problem. And sometimes your trainings are going later at night. And so, you really have to be able to
shut down.
And so, And so that was when I really started using cannabis more strategically and mindfully, at the same time as I was noticing, and I was just stepping away from alcohol. So around probably by the end of 2014, I had decided I don't want alcohol in my life anymore. I'm just not going to drink. And cannabis was playing a bit more of a part. And I started really looking into the science and reading about, the research that was coming out. I got interested in CBD, and then I started working in the cannabis industry. So then I had access to a lot of cannabis.
Lots of stuff.
I was working with it. It was like, pounds, and
which is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. But you get so used to it, and you're like, oh, it wasn't that much. It was only like 5 pounds or something, that's how it is when you work with hundreds of pounds. And
large amounts, it just becomes,
And so I really started at that point having all this access to, and reading the science, and knowing my own experiences, trying things more, finding what worked, and getting older as an athlete and finding how helpful it was for me. It was just like, oh, okay, so it was like a new area of like more mindful consumption instead of this recreational approach, which I don't have a problem with. But for me, it was like, oh, now I'm really using this therapeutically. And so it was a shift in
it's intentional
intentions.
use. Yeah. And it's having a specific intention for your use instead of just like, hey, I'm trying to get high, and finding that, it's my journey with alcohol has been very similar. I used to have a lot of fun, used to drink quite a bit. And over the years, it just is my journey into cannabis. Like I found cannabis and I had such a less desire to drink. And now one glass of wine, I'll have a headache. Like I don't enjoy it. And so it's totally changed that relationship. And so it's really introduced a whole new relationship with cannabis that it's like, it's allowed me to really hone in on my body and how it's interacting with me and to really use it with intention.
Yeah. And I really resonated with what you said, where your body starts shifting. I'm in my 40s. I'll be 44 in February. And I think back to when I used to be in the Navy. So, of course, when you're talking to like drinking is part of the culture, it definitely is part of the culture. Like, it's not, hey, do you want to drink? It's like, why do you only have 2 drinks in your hands? Like, this, we're here to party. But now I still love, I think I imagine about my favorite beer and I love the taste in my mind. But I know now that it's just my body at my age. It's just like, hey, that's cool, but maybe not so much anymore. And now I've just lost the taste for it completely. Right. I don't feel weird about like, and people don't feel weird about it. They ask if I'm at a social get together or anything like, hey, you want to drink? I'm like, no, I don't drink. And they go, oh, it's because he's
Same.
religious. Like, no, it's because I just got high out in the parking lot. And they go, oh, okay. Okay. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, why are you sorry? I'm sorry for you. You want to go outside? Like, it's like one of the best community gathering activities you can do, because it's like, you don't have to have like, okay, guys, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about astral projection. Go.
I mean, that's an interesting conversation to get onto with it, but
at the same time, it's just like what you said. Like it's a very weird dynamic once you start using it with a purpose that, like, I'm using this for therapeutic reasons, right? Like, I'm using this to help me focus. I'm using this to help relieve stress. I'm using this for add in those things. So now when I tell people, they go, oh, do you get high all the time? I'm like, no, I haven't been high in a long time. I actually use with intent. So if I'm feeling good, now there are been times where I've done like, whoa, I'm actually pretty high right now. Like I know now, just like you with the science, you're like, I've got CBD on hand. I can bring this back down. I can chill myself out. So many people don't realize that it's not just, like, I mean, I grew up doing it. I mean, you remember the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Spicoli, Sean Penn. You're like, whoa, man. That's how stoners have always appeared. And I always tell, I mean, when I tell people that I use, especially within the business community, they go, wait, are you using now? And I'm like, what time is it?
Yeah, people are always like, wait, so do you play? Like, do you get high and play?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I don't. But I know plenty of people do, and they're international class players. And it just depends on the person. Like for me, I need to keep my aggression. Like, and cannabis,
Makes you
again,
chill.
so it's individual though. Like, I know plenty of people who like to smoke before they go lift weights. For me, I know that's not a good, like I've tried it. It's not really my best mode. But if I'm going to go on like a long run, which isn't really rugby training, but it's nice sometimes. It's pleasant to go on like a scenic run and you're just out there, for that, like a moderate level edible or like low to moderate level is like transcendent. You can have this like really beautiful experience. But for me, I have to keep my aggression. Other people, it just depends. Like other people can also work. People can smoke and be like focused and work. And I'm like, I know myself. I always get tired, no matter if it's like, no, sativa, I've never had that energetic. It just doesn't. It's a sleepy thing. But that's why I smoke in the evenings before bed when I have, like relaxation mode. And so that's what, like, for me, I know specifically like how cannabis affects me, and there's no one size fits all. And so I don't, with my experience, it's absolutely the case for me, but there are other people who have a very different true experience of their own when it comes to like working out or sports or any of that working focus. It's so personal.
That's cool that I mean, especially knowing your body that way, because for me, I can use sativas during the day. It doesn't make me sleepy, but I only use a certain amount. And
Right.
and I stack it throughout the day, just little bits. You know, Brandon uses it a lot for pain, so that helps him manage it. And this guy, he consumes an unreasonable amount, and I say unreasonable for that specific statement there. And he'll be like, "Yeah, I mean, that's all right," because the pain is so severe in him, the medicine is actually working. So
Yes.
it makes more sense on that side. So it's knowing your body. So knowing exactly, because I love to lift on it. It helps me to focus. I get great pumps out of it. I leave there wrecked but renewed. You know what I mean?
See, whenever I hear, I'm always like, maybe I should try. I give it one more try, but
no, doesn't
for
work.
me, yeah. But what I know too, I also experimented with microdosing edibles before trainings, and when it was during sevens season, which is like intense sprinting, and so there's a level of pain that goes along with that, and there's a level of like flow state in your muscles, and I found that microdosing low dose edibles like a 1-to-1 of THC and CBD, like 1 milligram each, gave me like a nice, like it didn't like intoxicate me or make me, you know, it didn't take my edge away too much, but it gave me it blunted the pain just a tiny bit and helped me get in that flow state.
Cool.
So there's definitely applications just depending on your own body. And you know, I had teammates and I know professional players in various leagues who, including the NFL and the NBA, who would smoke before their games at halftime if they could, and of course immediately after. And that's the zone where I find like afterwards, especially being old, the pain, you know, it's like quick before the adrenaline wears off, like get some pain relief in, you know, because I'm going to stiffen up and be like, ah.
Oh yeah, I thought I saw this funny meme on TikTok about that, where it talks about, you know, when you get up from the couch in your 20s and then it shows in your 30s and then you get to your 40s and the guy's like, he barely moves and he farts and all of a sudden something sounds like it's breaking and he just collapses. Like I feel that now. I did, when you were talking about, you know, MMA, I did martial arts all since I was growing up. I trained Muay Thai fighters, and I know exactly now that pain, like my hips, like and jujitsu was awesome, especially when you're, I mean, I didn't use cannabis at the time, but I think about it now, like, no wonder why the UFC was like, no, we consider that more of a performance enhancing drug, because I could sit there and get my arm just tweaked out and just like, okay, well, I'm just going to relax and figure my way out of this.
You know, it is interesting. Like for me, it definitely doesn't rise to the level of a performance enhancing substance the way of like doping, you know, giving an unfair advantage, but it definitely supports overall wellness and good recovery. And that's what cannabis has given me so much of, like all the things that I've been prescribed over the years for different injuries. And I've got chronic injuries too that I have to live with and manage. And you know,
I
pain
can
every
imagine.
day.
You threw some wicked tackles. So
yeah. Oh, some of these pictures you see.
Yeah.
Like you talk about your, you know, you need your edge, you need your aggression. Like, yeah, I saw it right there. And so did she when she felt it when you hit her. And so that's so cool. And then you, I mean, even saying that right there, you're like, oh, you brings you back to that moment. You're like, yeah, I remember those. Those things stay with you. They bring the smiles.
It's true. It's true. And I don't have any regrets. I wouldn't change anything, but it would have been interesting if I knew ahead of time. Like if I could start from when I was young, I probably would have traded in a lot of that drinking, not done that, and traded some of it in for cannabis because you know, long term alcohol just damages you and it takes your energy and it just, you know, messes up your hormone levels and your all these things, hydration, whereas cannabis doesn't. It's anti-inflammatory, you know, helps sleep. And
it makes you drink lots of water.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's cool to see like what you are doing now to help other players in that though, like the UC San Diego thing that you guys are working on for the NFL players. Have you done much with that study so far?
Well, the pace of research is notoriously slow. So there's a lot of planning and paperwork before the study can even launch. And so it got approved and funded. This year is all the then paperwork and permissions and that kind of thing. And we're sort of waiting to hear on the date we can actually launch the study with, in humans. But it has been really rewarding to be a part of that group and to be able to give feedback on the study design and say, here's a realistic, because ultimately studies are only worth so much if they're not realistic. If they're set up in these artificial conditions, what can they really tell us about real life? And there's all kinds of legal barriers to making them realistic, but clever researchers have found a lot of workarounds and a lot of good designs. And so to be able to say, like, these are the types of schedules that players will have. These are the types of challenges they're going to face and needs they're going to have. And here's what players are doing currently to meet those needs, which includes across, not just rugby, but other sports. People self-medicate. And a lot of times they're using things like alcohol. They're using other things, And so things that I think are a lot more risky, that I know that science demonstrates are a lot more risky and harmful, right? And so I think it's just all about balance, and everybody's body's needs are different, but there's a lot that cannabis can offer.
Yeah, and if they find the proper dosing, and maybe it's a specific terpene, or even staying away from THC and only using aspects like CBN, CBG, CBD, not every terpene, every cannabinoid is going to be perfect for every person, but there
Yes.
is going to be a dose, thing that will bring value and benefit, I think, to everyone's quality of life, just depending on how they're using it and the intent.
And that goes along with, when people self-medicate, there is no dosing. I'm just going to take whatever until I feel good. And,
Mm-hmm.
And the argument comes back, like, I used to have these conversations with my wife. I'm like, look, if you're feeling something right now, I can help you. Like, I literally feel like I'm out like some Tolkien book, like I'm an apothecary with this cool green hat going, what troubles you? Bring you over here. Oh, you got a bit of a headache and the shake soda? Well, I'll roll you this joint and you're going to feel fantastic. And I did that with her. She's like, man, my legs, I don't know what's up in my legs, and my stomach hurts and I got a headache. I'm like, all right. I look at the strains I have and I'm like, all right, I roll up with this nice little pin joint. I'm like, let's go outside. Literally 5 minutes later, it's gone. And it's so wonderful knowing that the different variations of this plant or strains, it just tells you that there are so many different ways to be able to match different people, as typical Western medicine is just like, this pill works for all of these things. Like, does it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but there are some
Right.
side effects, like, bleeding out of your ears, erectile dysfunction, some other stuff. I mean, they're going to give you like this list of like horrible things will make your brain bleed. Like, wait a minute, what? Should I be taking this? Or like, yeah, don't worry about
It's
it though.
cool. There's another pill for the other
And
side.
if you have any of these symptoms,
Right.
stop right away, drink lots of orange juice. Like, that's a very specific command. Like, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, exactly. You said, like, it's being able to get these studies to be able to understand it, and especially with athletes, because that just carries down throughout the rest of the public. You're seeing people that are at the pinnacle of keeping their physical health, yet so many of them, have you seen, I'm sure, have completely destroyed their lives or shortened their lives because of using something that, because it was a prescription and it's supposed to take care of this, it's accepted. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Even there's the self-medicating that goes on, and then there's the prescription. And I mean, I've been prescribed like all kinds of things. I've broken bones, I've had surgeries, I've torn ligaments. I mean, I've so things like heavy duty anti-inflammatories. What did I do? I think I tore a ligament in my ankle. What was it that I had? And I wanted to, or it was a partial tear. Nope, it was an avulsion fracture in my foot. So avulsion fracture is where the ligament or the tendon that's attached to the bone, like, pulls a chunk off the bone. because you just like tore your own body apart. You tried so hard, And so I was in a tournament and I was like, did I twist my ankle? My foot swelled way up, and it turned out to be this avulsion fracture. So really the pain was tremendous, but that was due to the swelling. And so to get the swelling down, I took indomethacin, which is like a hardcore anti-inflammatory.
Whoa.
But I wanted to play in the playoffs, and they were 6 weeks away. So I took it for like 6 weeks, and I was having stomach bleeding, and like it was really bad. And this was right at the cusp of me, like soon after I was like, oh, I would have tried high dose CBD before, if I would have known before doing that. And so that's just one example. But interestingly, by the time I had surgery in like the end of 2017, I had hernia surgery, and I chose not to use any of the prescription painkillers afterward. I just used cannabis products, flower, THC, CBD rich, because THC, is a better painkiller, it's more effective. CBD is great for inflammation and it's all around. So I, combine both, use both at different times a day, depending on what you need. And I was able to recover well. I was walking around within a couple of days.
That's awesome.
I could feel it, but it was manageable. I managed the pain and I had a smooth recovery, and I felt really good about it. And it was cool to demonstrate to myself, like, oh, okay, well, here we go. Here's a chance to really try out a different kind of need, pain relief for this, and how is this going to go? And so, so I tend to try it as a first line
defense
medicine.
On things.
For different kinds of pain, whether that's migraines or an injury or, it doesn't work for everything.
Nope.
I had a rough incident during the early pandemic, like kind of mid 2020. I ended up getting a kidney infection, but it presented as like this intense back pain. So I thought I threw my back out. Ow. So I took some CBD rich RSO, but being RSO, even though the CBD rich is still very strong. And so I got super stoned, but it didn't help with the pain because, as it turned out, it was an infection that was raging. And so then I was just super stoned and in intense pain. So that wasn't the.
And then you like hyper focus on it. You're like,
because you're left with deep thoughts of pain.
I would have gone to the ER, but it was like, this was early COVID where it was like, don't go there. It might be a death sentence. You know what I mean? Like it was in like summer of 2020. So I made it through the night, and I got like a fever of 103. It was bad. And so then I went to the doctor the next day, and like they figured it out, got me on like hardcore antibiotics. With, there are times and places for that, but but for plenty of other things, I've successfully used cannabis to just heal and manage and do that more successfully without things like stomach bleeding and addiction and all of the other side effects of hardcore prescribed narcotics and muscle relaxers and all those things.
I can't even touch them. I mean, I got some dental work done. I had I don't know what it was. I think it was during the pandemic, but I broke one of my molars eating like a chip or something. I put it in my mouth, and it was at the right time, and hear this pop. And I was like, but I finally got it. I was working with this company. They're like, hey, we want to take care of that for you. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And the doc's like, I'm going to give you a script of pain meds after this. He's like, the older you are when you get this work, it's really painful. I said, no, thank you. He's like, well, why? And I said, well, before I came in here, I puffed off of a vape pen. I'm ready to go pain-wise right now, and my inflammation is low. I said, let's get this going. He's like, you don't want gas? I'm like, no, thank you. I'm good. And he was shocked. But out of all the times, and I hate dentists because of my childhood. Because you remember, we grew up at the same time. It was like, open your mouth, and you thought that guy was going to bust that thing through the side of your face. And anyways, it was dark times. But anyway, going full circle. When he had that, I didn't feel any pain during the entire procedure. And then even after the inflammation was managed, because I had enough CBD in me, and then using THC at night so I could sleep. Like it's amazing the different attributes it can bring. And so I just think it's so amazing what you're doing with the example that you have set and with your your background and your prestige, it really helps people kind of break down that barrier. You're making a lot more progress within the cannabis community based on just that. The amount of what you've been able to do is reach and helping people. Have you noticed that there's a little bit more destigmatization with what you are doing with your background? Does that help people kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe because people our age, I feel that they are the hardest ones to bridge that gap because they still think of Spicoli from, Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Days of Confused, like only losers use cannabis.
Yeah, different generations have really been, had that ingrained so hard in them, that honestly propaganda, because our own, government was involved in producing that false information when they've had the science for decades that
Mm-hmm.
shows it's not true.
Wow.
But yeah, I think that's just down to the importance of storytelling in terms of like telling your own story, in a way that's sincere and genuine and honest. And people are open to sometimes hearing messages from certain sources more than others. For some people, it'll really resonate for them to read some research, but that would be, I think it's a minority of people. Most people, it
Mm-hmm.
really makes an impact when they can hear the facts of someone's life. And then you can refer back to the research and say, oh, this is actually illustrated by these studies. But there is a certain credibility that comes from lived experience, and so when you have a platform, it's you better make use of it because you can potentially open people's minds, and that matters because not only could they potentially benefit from cannabis or someone that they love, but we all know public opinion matters a lot in our laws,
Mm-hmm.
in influencing what's legal and what's not legal. And sometimes it lags behind.
Mm-hmm.
Most Americans have approved of cannabis legalization for several years now, and we haven't seen that reflected fully in our politics, but we're moving that way. And so, if I can just keep telling the truth and my truth, then that's what I can do to contribute to that. Because really, everyone should have access. There are people who are suffering
Mm-hmm.
unnecessarily who shouldn't be, who could, whose lives could be dramatically changed for the better, and we could be doing much more research. And right now, that's blocked by the Schedule One status of cannabis in the U.S. So, not to mention there are social injustices that need to be corrected.
Yeah, you're part of
Around.
the Last Prisoner Project as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because it's just, you know, people shouldn't be in prison for cannabis. And we
Yeah.
see also that those arrests and sentences happen in a racially disproportionate manner, which is another injustice on top of it.
Yeah.
So, we need to make that right. We have much greater problems in the world than people using a plant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which has been proven to be harmless on like every aspect of them using it, basically. So,
Well, even you think about with conflict, like when we talk about cannabis and the therapeutic properties with it, especially for those who have a lot of anxiety, a lot of anger, maybe childhood trauma, whatever it may be, it's a
Mhm.
great vehicle to be able to be a little bit more introspective and thinking, why am I all pissed off here? Like I'm a calm guy now. I was a very
Mhm.
angry guy for very many years,
Mhm.
and I'm not too hippied out to forget that I still know how to do violence, but um, at the same time, it just slows a lot of things down in perspective. And, I especially when we talk about pharmaceuticals is going into mental health and mental illness and things like that. Definitely cannabis is not for everybody on that side, but what it can do for anxiety, for depression, I've seen massive things within my own life with others around me. So I get it. It's like, it's just keeping to that, sticking to your word, saying, you know what, it's not that bad. And we really need to get more science on this. We can have completely different lives now and think of what could have been created 20 years prior for all the way up to now. when we're like, oh man, this is the best vape cart I've ever seen, where it would now be completely different how it transports through our system right now. What could they do? What could they have modified?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And you think about, again, cannabis isn't all things to all people. It's going to interact with each of our unique body chemistry and endocannabinoid system. And so for some people, there are people out there who it wouldn't be useful in their lives, but there are many more who it would be. And those people shouldn't be blocked just because some people, even if their personal experience is, oh, it did nothing good for me, that's fine. But also, people who could use it and benefit are much greater. And those are just the things that we know about. But I mean, there is really intriguing, really promising, really exciting early research for things like cancer and autism that affect broad amounts of the population, and and treatments are difficult. And so why would we be blocking these potentially breakthrough therapies? So there's just really it's beyond urgent that we make things the way they should be. And that's going back to me as a 13-year-old being like, wow, wait a minute, this is really messed up. This shouldn't be illegal. Like,
my brain doesn't feel like an egg cracked in a frying pan. I feel I feel great.
Yeah. You're like, wait a minute, I'm being told all this stuff, and I know it's not true because I tried it, and I know it's not true. And and that also doesn't mean I have concerns about, of course, there can be misuse of cannabis, and there is. People who are abusing it and self-medicating to a point where it becomes a destructive force in their lives. But yet those rates are much lower than other things that are legal. Alcohol, nicotine kill many thousands of people every year. And prescription drugs, can you imagine this substance? Well, it helps people with pain and it helps them with all these other things, but we think it's too dangerous because people could get addicted. Well, then why do we have opioids?
Any other medications?
Yes, right. Exactly. It's really wild. The strange hypocrisy. It's it's a cultural cognitive dissonance that we have. So, at a certain point, people, and we all know that to some extent, there are a lot of people who could, learn more, but I find that people are really open to it. And that's because cannabis really helps people. A lot of older people, their generations were like the baby boomers and older, they got a lot of really strong anti-drug propaganda. And so they can be hesitant. And if you explain the science to them and give them really good guidelines around here's something you could try that, you want to start low and go slow, see if this helps. And then they feel relief. I mean, that changes people's minds right there. Works. It works. And so that changes minds. And I think that's another reason why most Americans favor having cannabis be legal.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Do you teach that in your CBD certification course that you do?
Teach what exactly?
The understanding of more of cannabis and legality stuff, everything into that, the science of it.
Figuring out your dosing.
I do. I touch on all. It's a very action-packed 90 to 120 minutes, depending on how long we run. But I just go through a brief foundation of cannabis science. It has a focus on CBD, but it touches on everything, and practical things like how do you what are the delivery methods, what are the different pros and cons or risks and benefits, and in the political and cultural dimensions, because those are important. You can't look at this just as even if you live in a state where cannabis is legal and you have access, is that then morally okay for me as an individual to be like, cool, I'm all set, I'm just going to do my thing here, ignoring the fact that there are people, again, people suffering and people sitting in jail,
for the same plant.
Yeah. And for me also, so I think consumers should really be involved in that, but also anybody who works in the cannabis industry. Really, if you make your living from the plant, you got to be involved in activism. No, it's a moral imperative, I think.
Do you have a way that people can get in touch with you for like the Last Prisoner Project or like your CBD courses?
I am on Instagram. My username's Exit Drug. So, the opposite of a gateway drug, which is
right.
Cannabis and CBD are often called exit drugs.
Yeah.
So you can follow me on there, reach out to me on there, and also I think Last Prisoner Project. You can reach out to them directly. They're pretty great. They have a strong organization, but I'm always happy to make introductions if people are interested in that. I think right now they're doing a holiday letter writing where you can write to somebody who's incarcerated for cannabis and just send them some cheer, and
are we allowed to send cheer in the mail to prisoners? Because I'll roll up all the cheer and we'll send them all out.
Emotional cheer if you don't want a very heavy knock on your door,
Yeah, no, I agree, and especially with what you're doing with these wrongfully imprisoned individuals. We've been seeing that. Like that's one of the first things that I would like to see done is let's just get that wave of the hand, get all of these people out. They're there with violent offenders. They're there with people who have destroyed others' lives financially. These are people that need to be locked up. When you just had somebody who had an exorbitant amount of plant and they're like, I'm trying to help a lot of people.
Well, and some of them aren't even that. I don't remember the name, but there's one man that I've read and he's in there. I think it was like 2 joints or 3 joints, and he's got a life sentence because of
those 3 strike laws.
Yeah. And
I think that's insane. Kevin Allen in Louisiana. It was like $20 worth of pot, and it's like, it was a 3. I mean, it's like, insane.
Yet people get pulled over with ounces and all of this all the time. Yet this man's in prison for life.
Yeah, just that's because insane. Now, and it just goes back to what you're talking about, heavily being the propaganda that was poured into their brains just makes it where it's no longer just a thought like, yeah, that's bad, or maybe we shouldn't do that. That turns into like almost a religious dogma at that point. Like, let's get them with the pitchforks. They got the pot. I can't believe they're doing this, destroying children. Are you kidding?
Yeah. And I think not only do a majority of Americans, again, think that cannabis should be legal in some form across our country. I think that, generationally we're making, things are totally different with the younger people coming up, but even with the older people. And that's why I always encourage people to be open to do. That's what I call everyday activism. Even if they're just saying, I take CBD for my arthritis, it really helps. It can make inroads into communities and open some minds. Because again, public opinion is a powerful force for politicians. They don't care about a whole lot necessarily, but they do care about getting reelected usually.
Yeah.
So, if it can become this issue where it's just an obvious, it's a slam dunk, which I feel like we're almost at that point.
I feel like it's getting there. We're not quite there yet. Like, I feel like there's some cogs that are not quite in place, but it's working on it, and more people speaking up and being open about it, not being afraid to have the conversations about even simple cannabis use,
Yeah, or even that stigma that goes around it. And it's because of individuals like you that are going out, that are speaking this truth. And it's the reasons why we created this podcast is about those consumers, because in order for us to be able to change those politicians' minds, you got to have a shitload of consumers. Yeah. I mean, everybody wants, if you've got people that's why we have the medications we have today available. There shouldn't be, a great commercial about euthanasia where you're feeling like, oh, that made me feel good about myself. Like, no, it should be more commercials about cannabis and cannabis related products. Like, we should already be at that point. And if we have more consumers that are saying, hey, we're done, we want this now. That's when they go, well, the money's going this way and that's how we operate. So let's give them to them.
Yeah. And, money is another force that it's a powerful force. And there are definitely, we see a lot of people wanting to get into the cannabis industry, big green rush, which isn't really the case at this point, that it's not currently the most profitable industry. And that has to do with a lot of different things. Federal taxation is a big part of it, but also, I personally look at it as it's agriculture, it's healthcare, it has environmental aspects, and it can be the best of all these things if we do it right.
Right.
As well as criminal justice reform. We don't need to have. We have people in prison where they shouldn't be, number one, because it's an injustice, but then also we're paying for that as taxpayers. We're paying for that. And, so there's all these ways where society can progress and improve, and people's lives can be better.
How many
in
families are on welfare
ways.
too because their parent is in prison for some stupid minor thing? So not only is it paying tax for that, it's also paying tax for the people on the welfare projects and that they're on, versus having a supportive, stable family of the parents at home. Oh my God, they use cannabis, but there's a family. Like, it's a lot better support than how they destroy it. And yeah, it's
the
been
war on
horrible.
drugs has destroyed the lives of individuals, families, and entire communities. And like you point out, I mean, if somebody, drinks every night, they come home after work and they have a few beers,
That's
nobody's knocking down their door to take their kids and drag them off to jail. So, why should that be treated differently? And it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much for being able to have time out of your busy schedule. We just felt this would be so amazing for our audience to be able to hear this, because the perspective that you give, and especially the idea of where you came from, where you are to now, and what you're trying to be able to do for the future of everybody there. Just like you said, if you're in this industry and you are profiting off of this plant, you need to be an activist. You need to be involved. It's not just because of your livelihood, it's because of the future of communities, of individuals, and being able to reform laws.
Yeah. Can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This has been fantastic. Like, we truly appreciate you coming on the show and taking your time out of your day. So
thanks so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
Oh, awesome. That's us every day.
Yeah.
All the time.
That's like mostly what we do is talk about cannabis.
That's pretty much.
Yeah.
So no, hey, thank you again. And for those who are listening or watching this, all of the information about all the organizations that she's involved with is going to be down below
in the show notes.
Yeah, in the show notes. And go follow her. Go follow her on Instagram.
Yep.
Exit Drug.
So that'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is awesome.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah. Take care.